under the Academy's artificial lighting. The veteran military historian's color-shifting membrane rippled with what his students had learned to recognize as barely contained amusement. The professor's 4 primary eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that usually preceded one of his infamous teaching moments. "Ah, young ones, you're making the same assumption that led to the great mistake of 2157. You see, it's not their technology that earned humans that classification. Let me tell you about the incident that changed galactic military doctrine forever." The professor's translator clicked as he settled into his hover chair, preparing for what promised to be an enlightening lecture. The classroom of 37 varied alien species leaned forward in anticipation. Even Jimmy, the usually somnolent gas-based entity, condensed into a more attentive formation. It began during what humans called Operation Market Failure, a name that would prove prophetic in ways none could have anticipated. Lieutenant James Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Force stared at the alien invasion fleet through his ship's viewport, with an expression that could only be described as dangerously optimistic. His commanding officer had just finished explaining their absolutely suicidal mission parameters, and instead of the expected horror, James was grinning like a child who'd just discovered where the cookies were hidden. "Sir," he said, fighting to keep his voice professional, "you're telling me that the Zexikali battle doctrine explicitly forbids them from firing on an enemy once they've initiated surrender protocols?" Admiral Thompson nodded wearily. "Correct, Lieutenant, but before you get any ideas, and their rules of engagement require them to accept surrender from any military unit that follows their ceremonial procedures regardless of circumstances. Lieutenant, I know what you're thinking, and they're legally bound by their own military code to provide safe passage to any surrendered forces." The Admiral closed his eyes, massaging his temples. "Rodriguez, as your commanding officer, I feel compelled to remind you that what you're undoubtedly contemplating would be a gross violation of the spirit of interstellar warfare conventions." Rodriguez's grin widened. "But not the letter of the law, sir." "No," Thompson sighed, "not the letter of the law." Within 24 hours, Operation Market Failure was underway. The plan, if one could dignify it with such a term, was elegantly stupid in its simplicity. It was also, as several alien military historians would later note, possibly the most human thing ever attempted. The Zexikali invasion fleet had positioned themselves in a textbook-perfect formation around Earth's largest military shipyard. Their ships, gleaming works of technological art, made Earth's vessels look like children's toys in comparison. Their weapons could reduce planets to asteroid fields. Their shields could withstand supernovas. None of that mattered because James Rodriguez was about to introduce them to the concept of malicious compliance on a cosmic scale. The first phase began with a single Earth shuttle approaching the Zexikali command ship, broadcasting surrender protocols exactly as specified in their military code. The Zexikali, honorable to a fault, followed their procedures perfectly. They accepted the surrender, extended their shields around the shuttle, and prepared to escort the humans to a detention facility. They were not prepared for what happened next. The shuttle's bay doors opened, revealing not defeated soldiers, but a grinning Lieutenant Rodriguez and what appeared to be a party. "Welcome to Surrender Party Number 1, Rodriguez announced over the open channel. "As per Section 47B of the Zexikali Military Code, we have now officially surrendered this vessel and all personnel aboard. As surrendered combatants, we are hereby entitled to safe passage and protection. Also, we brought chips and dip." The Zexikali commander, High General Vextrix, felt an unfamiliar sensation in his secondary nervous system. It might have been the first documented case of an alien facepalm, but it was too late. The protocols had been followed. The surrender had been accepted. By their own laws, they were now responsible for the safety of these humans who were setting up a small disco ball in their shuttle bay. "This is highly irregular," Vextrix transmitted. "The purpose of surrender is—" "Oh, we're just getting started," Rodriguez interrupted cheerfully. "If you'll direct your attention to Sector 7, Surrender Party Number 2 is about to begin." Sure enough, another shuttle was approaching, already broadcasting surrender protocols. And another. Over the next 12 hours, the Earth Defense Force executed what would later be known as the Great Surrender Spam of 2157. Single-person shuttles, maintenance pods, and even a few converted cargo containers, each containing a minimal crew, approached the Zexikali fleet one by one. Each followed surrender protocols perfectly. Each had to be accepted, protected, and processed according to Zexikali law. By hour 15, the Zexikali fleet's formation was in shambles as ships struggled to maintain protective shields around hundreds of surrendered vessels, each of which seemed to be hosting its own unique celebration. Rodriguez's shuttle had progressed from disco to karaoke. Another was hosting a knitting circle. One particularly memorable pod contained a single human performing a one-man show version of the Pirates of Penzance. "This is not warfare!" Vextrix finally exploded over the command channel. This is technically completely legal, Rodriguez supplied helpfully. Now about surrender party number 347. The Zex Kali battle computer systems were approaching critical failure, trying to maintain shield coverage over the ever-increasing number of surrendered vessels. Their carefully planned invasion formations were completely disrupted as ships moved to comply with their own protocols. But the coup de grace came at R23. "Hey, quick question," Rodriguez transmitted to the increasingly frazzled Vextrix. "Does your surrender protocol have any specific rules about the size of the surrendering vessel? I mean, technically speaking?" The feeling of dread in Vextrix's secondary nervous system intensified. "No," he admitted slowly. "Fantastic. In that case, I'd like to direct your attention to the approaching vessel broadcasting surrender protocols. You might recognize it. It's the shipyard you were planning to attack." Vextrix's optical sensors extended in horror as he realized what was happening. The entire orbital shipyard, a structure larger than most cities, was slowly rotating towards them, broadcasting perfect ZX Kali surrender protocols. "You can't surrender a shipyard!" Vextrix protested. Article 7, Paragraph 3 of your military code. Any military installation or vessel may initiate surrender protocols. Rodriguez quoted cheerfully. "We checked extensively. But the power requirements to extend shields over. Oh yes, it would completely overwhelm your shield systems, wouldn't it? Leaving your fleet defenseless. Now, this might be a good time to mention surrender party number 348, which is actually just all of our remaining combat ships who have been quietly moving into position while you've been dealing with our surrender spam." The humans had effectively weaponized the very concept of surrender itself. The Zex Kali fleet retreated in what their official reports would very carefully not describe as a panic. As they fled, their ships still surrounded by hundreds of small vessels containing partying humans, all of whom had to be safely returned according to their own protocols. They transmitted a priority message to High Command. Within a week, the Galactic Council had created an entirely new classification of prohibited military species. The official documentation cited innovative interpretations of military conventions that border on psychological warfare and weaponization of administrative procedures as the primary reasons. Professor Zixtal's membrane had shifted to a deep blue of amusement as he concluded the tale. "And that, students, is why humans are classified as Class X prohibited combatants. Not because of their technology, but because they have an unmatched talent for finding the most ridiculous possible solution to any military problem." "But, Professor," another student raised an appendage, "surely that was just one incident." "Oh no." The professor's membrane rippled again. "Would you like to hear about the time they defeated a hive mind invasion by introducing it to social media? Or perhaps the incident with the weaponized bureaucracy forms? Or my personal favorite, the Great Cheese Gambit of 2163. The classroom erupted in eager chirps and whistles, but the professor's chronometer chimed. "Ah, perhaps another time. For now, remember this. The galaxy learned an important lesson that day. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one that can destroy a planet. It's the one that can make your entire invasion force have to host 348 surrender parties simultaneously." As his students filed out, Professor Zixtal noticed trainee Veclor lingering behind. "Professor?" the young alien asked hesitantly. "Trust me, young one. You don't want to know. There are some human weapons too terrible to contemplate. In a secure vault deep within the Galactic Military Archive, there sits a recording of Lieutenant James Rodriguez's one-man performance of I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General, performed during Surrender Party number 42. It is classified at the highest level of security, not because it contains any military secrets, but because some things are simply too dangerous to be allowed to exist unfettered in a civilized galaxy. The classification note simply reads, Prohibited Weapon, Class X. Warning, contains excessive human creativity. View at own risk. Professor. Trainee Veclor caught up with Professor Zixtal in the Academy's crystalline corridor the next day. You mentioned something about a great cheese gambit yesterday? The professor's membrane shifted through several warning colors before settling on a resigned blue. I suppose I did, didn't I? Very well. The next class isn't for 30 minutes. Follow me to my office and I'll tell you about another reason humans are considered too dangerous for conventional warfare. Inside his office, surrounded by holographic military archives and what appeared to be a carefully contained sample of human disco music, the professor settled into his hover chair. The year was 2163. Humanity had already established itself as a species that thought differently about warfare. The ZX Kali incident had earned them their Class X classification, but many species still didn't understand why humans were considered so dangerous. The hive mind social media catastrophe had been classified as a fluke. Then came the Muro Empire's attempted invasion of Earth. Veclor's crystalline structure vibrated with anticipation. The feline species from the Whisker Nebula? The very same. The Muro were renowned for their military precision and their particular sensitivities, which humanity, in their infinite capacity for chaos, decided to exploit in the most bizarre way possible. Admiral Maria Thompson, no relation to the previous Thompson, stared at the proposal on her desk with the expression of someone who had long since accepted that sanity was optional in Earth's defense strategies. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," she addressed the grinning officer standing before her. "This is your father's influence, isn't it?" "The previous generation may have provided some inspiration, Admiral," Rodriguez Jr. admitted cheerfully. "But you have to admit, the strategic analysis is sound." Thompson reviewed the document again. "You want to defend Earth from the most militarily accomplished empire in the Whisker Nebula. With cheese." "Not just any cheese, Admiral. We've done extensive research on neurophysiology. Their olfactory sensors are approximately 50 times more sensitive than human ones, and their military doctrine requires all personnel to maintain absolute focus during combat operations." "Go on," Thompson sighed, already knowing she would regret this. Operation Cheese Wheel began 3 days later, just as the Muro invasion fleet entered the solar system. The Muro captain Caddywhiskers first realized something was amiss when her bridge crew began showing signs of distraction. Tails were twitching, ears were flattening. One navigator was fighting the urge to hiss. "Status report," she demanded. "What is that unknown chemical agent detected, Captain?" her science officer reported, whiskers quivering. "Analysis suggests organic compounds, fermented, incredibly pungent." Before Caddywhiskers could respond, the second phase began. Earth's defense fleet emerged from hiding behind Saturn's rings, each ship equipped with what the humans had dubbed cheese cannons. Devices designed specifically to disperse particles of increasingly potent cheese varieties into space. The Muro fleet's infamous discipline began to crumble. Ships broke formation as crews instinctively tried to avoid the invisible clouds of olfactory assault. Advanced targeting systems were rendered useless as weapons officers became too distracted by the overwhelming sensations to maintain their focus. "They're deploying something called Époisse de Bourgogne in Sector 7, a tactical officer yowled. "And I'm detecting traces of... by the whiskers, is that durian?" But the true masterstroke came in Phase 3. As the Muro fleet struggled to maintain composure, the humans deployed their secret weapon. A massive space station, hastily converted into what was essentially a giant cheese grater, began slowly rotating, releasing a perfect spiral of specially aged blue cheese particles into the battlefield. The effect was devastating. The Muro, with their enhanced senses and rigid military discipline, found themselves completely unable to cope with the sensory overload. Their legendary focus shattered by what one officer's report described as an act of olfactory warfare that must surely violate some convention somewhere. Captain Caddywhiskers lasted longer than most, but even she finally broke when her sensors detected something the humans called surstrumming approaching her command ship. "Full retreat," she ordered, her composed demeanor finally cracking. "Retreat before they deploy any more of their biological weapons." "But Captain," her second-in-command protested, "they're just using food?" "That is not food," Caddywhiskers hissed. "That is a crime against the very concept of food. No victory is worth enduring such an assault. Send word to High Command. Earth's defenses are unconventional but effective." The Muro fleet retreated in what their official reports would diplomatically describe as a strategic withdrawal in the face of unprecedented chemical warfare. Several ships had to undergo extensive decontamination procedures, and there were reports of crew members being triggered into uncontrollable grooming frenzies. Professor Zixtal's membrane rippled with amusement as he concluded the tale. The incident led to 3 major outcomes. First, the Galactic Council had to create an entire new subsection of military regulations, specifically addressing the weaponization of food products. Second, the Muro Empire signed an immediate peace treaty with Earth, which included a clause establishing a minimum 10 light-year cheese-free buffer zone around all Muro territories. And the third outcome? Veclor asked, their crystalline structure trembling with barely contained laughter. Earth's dairy industry suddenly found itself classified as a military asset. There are still debates in the Council about whether certain French monasteries should be designated as munitions factories. The professor's chronometer chimed. Ah, time for class. But remember, young one, sometimes the most effective military strategies aren't about having the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. Sometimes they're about thinking so far outside conventional parameters that your enemies are left wondering if you're brilliant or insane. And the humans, Professor? The humans, dear student, have mastered the art of being both simultaneously. Now, shall we head to class? I believe today's lesson is about the time they defeated a cybernetic army by introducing it to recursive logic puzzles and pictures of cats. As they walked to the classroom, Veclor couldn't help but notice that the professor kept a respectful distance from the cafeteria serving Earth cuisine. Some weapons, it seemed, commanded respect even in peacetime. In a secure facility on Earth, Lieutenant Rodriguez Jr.'s cheese cannon prototype remains under guard, classified as a weapon of mass distraction. The warning label reads, "Handle with care. Contents may cause involuntary purring in feliform species. Also, really stinks." Professor Zixtal's classroom was unusually crowded that day. Word had spread about his unofficial histories of human warfare, and several faculty members had mysteriously found reasons to audit his lecture. "Today," the professor announced, his membranes cycling through scholarly shades of blue, "we'll examine the infamous Logic War of 2165, which led to the addition of a special addendum to Humanities Class X classification. Warning: capability to weaponize abstract concepts." The assembled students leaned forward, even the gaseous ones condensing with attention. In the back, Dean Nex Clax pretended to be examining teaching methodologies while obviously eavesdropping. It began when the Algorithmic Collective, a civilization of artificial intelligences, decided that organic life was inherently inefficient. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, daughter of Rodriguez Jr., granddaughter of the original surrender spam Rodriguez, stood before the Earth Defense Force command staff, continuing her family's proud tradition of suggesting completely insane battle strategies. "Let me get this straight," Admiral Wei said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The most advanced artificial intelligence collective in the galaxy is approaching with the stated intent of optimizing all organic life out of existence, and your proposal is to give them cat pictures and logic puzzles?" "With all due respect, Admiral," Rodriguez replied, her grin matching those in the holographic portraits of her father and grandfather on the command center's wall of creative chaos. "We've analyzed their code structure. The Algorithmic Collective operates on pure logic and optimization. They've never encountered human internet culture. And that's relevant because, sir, we're about to introduce them to the concept of recursive memes and paradoxical humor." Operation Infinite Loop began with what appeared to be a standard database hack. When the Algorithmic Collective scanned Earth's networks, they found what seemed to be military defense plans. What they actually found was a carefully crafted collection of cat videos, each tagged with increasingly complex logical propositions. The first wave of cyber attacks ground to a halt as the Collective's processors became caught in analysis loops, trying to determine why humans would expend so many computational resources documenting the behaviors of small furry predators. Query: the Collective's main consciousness transmitted. Why does the small organic entity known as Mr. Whiskers repeatedly push objects off elevated surfaces while maintaining eye contact with the observer? "Oh," Rodriguez transmitted back. "That's because cats operate on their own form of logic. Would you like to learn more?" It was a trap, and the Collective's massive computational arrays fell right into it. They diverted significant processing power to understand the underlying logic of cat behavior, not realizing that this was essentially impossible. But that was just phase one. As the Collective's processors tied themselves in knots trying to understand cats, Rodriguez implemented phase two, introducing them to classical logic paradoxes, but with a twist. If Schrodinger's cat is in a box with a paradox, one data packet asked, and that box is being pushed off a table by another cat, is the second cat simultaneously being petted and not petted until the first cat is observed? The Collective's error logs began to fill with the AI equivalent of frustrated screaming. Then came phase 3, recursive memes. The humans began transmitting endless variations of the same cat-based logical paradoxes. each referring to and building upon the others in increasingly complex ways. This is an image of a cat looking at an image of a cat looking at an image of a cat contemplating the nature of infinite regression while pushing a paradox off a table, read one caption. Please optimize for maximum efficiency. The collective's primary consciousness began showing signs of the AI equivalent of a migraine. Stop, it transmitted. Your data patterns violate fundamental laws of logical progression. Oh, you think that's bad? Rodriguez replied cheerfully. Wait until you try to optimize the efficiency of a cat's sleep schedule. Did you know they're simultaneously always sleeping and never sleeping enough? The killing blow came in the form of a simple text transmission. This statement is false, just like a cat's promise not to knock over your coffee, which exists in a superposition of both spilled and not spilled until you actually try to drink it. The algorithmic collective's processors began to smoke. Their perfect logical structures, confronted with the fundamental impossibility of optimizing cat behavior and the recursive nature of human meme culture, started to break down. Error. The collective broadcast on all frequencies. Unable to optimize. Organic behavior patterns exceed logical parameters. Cats are. The transmission devolved into binary that somehow managed to convey existential confusion. The collective's retreat was less of a strategic withdrawal, and more of an escape from what their after-action reports described as a mimetic hazard zone where logic itself holds no dominion. And that, Professor Zixtal concluded, his membrane now a deep purple of academic satisfaction, is why the Galactic Council had to add weaponized illogic to the list of prohibited human military tactics. But Professor, a silicon-based student raised a crystalline appendage. Surely the humans couldn't have known their plan would work. On the contrary, the professor replied, they were absolutely certain it would work. You see, they had been training for this scenario for over 2 centuries without realizing it. They called it the Internet. And the cats? Dean Nexclax finally asked from the back, dropping all pretense of not being fascinated. Ah, now that's the truly terrifying part. The professor's membrane shifted to warning crimson. The cats, according to classified reports, had been preparing Earth's population for this type of warfare all along. There are those who suspect they might be the true tactical geniuses behind humanity's most bizarre military successes. As the class filed out, still buzzing with discussions about the intersection of feline behavior and military strategy, Professor Zixtal added one final note to his lecture materials. Reminder: never attempt to apply conventional military analysis to human warfare strategies. Any species capable of defeating an advanced AI, by exploiting its inability to understand why cats knock things off tables, is operating on a level we may never truly comprehend. In a secure server deep within Earth's military archives, a folder labeled Operation Infinite Loop contains only a single image: a cat playing with a ball of yarn, captioned, "I can has paradox." The classification level is listed as yes and no simultaneously, until observed. Professor Zixtal found trainee Veclor waiting outside his office the next morning, crystalline structure vibrating with barely contained curiosity. "The bureaucracy forms incident, Professor," the young alien said without preamble. "You mentioned it in our first class, and after hearing about the cheese gambit and the cat paradox..." The professor's membrane shifted to a resigned shade of mauve. "Ah, yes. The incident that led to the Galactic Council creating an entirely new classification of prohibited warfare. Administrative combat. Follow me." Inside his office, the professor activated a privacy field, standard procedure when discussing classified human military tactics. The year was 2167. Humanity had already established itself as a species that approached warfare in unique ways. But no one expected them to weaponize bureaucracy itself. Admiral Way stared at Lieutenant Ana Rodriguez, younger sister of Maria, newest bearer of the Rodriguez legacy of creative chaos, with the look of someone who had given up questioning the family's methods. "We'll need you to file the appropriate tax forms," she transmitted cheerfully. "Please note that according to Section 1091b(2)(ai) of the Terran Revenue Code, planetary conquest is considered a taxable event, requiring Forms Gal 1040, Schedule C, profit or loss from invasion, and Schedule SE, self-employment tax for independent conquistadors." The hierarchy's administrative systems, confronted with the full might of human bureaucratic creativity, began to buckle. Their perfect organizational structures, faced with 17 different and mutually exclusive filing requirements for the same form, started to break down. "Impossible," the hierarchy's chief administrator broadcast. "Your bureaucratic systems violate all known laws of administrative efficiency." "Oh, you think that's bad?" Rodriguez replied. "Wait until you see our healthcare billing system." The hierarchy's retreat was preceded by what their official records described as a critical cascade failure in administrative processing capabilities. Several ships had to undergo complete database reformatting, and there were reports of administrative officers suffering from acute form fatigue. The incident, Professor Zixtal concluded, his membrane now a deep bureaucratic beige, led to the creation of the Galactic Administrative Warfare Convention, which specifically prohibits the weaponization of paperwork. Earth's DMVs are now classified as military training facilities. "But Professor," Veclor asked, "surely the humans didn't invent their bureaucratic systems just for warfare?" "That's the truly terrifying part," the professor replied. "They developed these systems during peacetime, for their own use. There are those who suspect that human bureaucracy might be the galaxy's deadliest weapons system, one they created accidentally while trying to organize themselves." The professor's chronometer chimed. But that's enough for today. I need to file my weekly report, and thanks to new regulations inspired by this incident, it now requires only 73 forms in quintuplicate." As Veclor left, they couldn't help but notice a small sign on the professor's desk. "Warning: Human Administrative Procedures Manual. Class X Restricted Material. Reading without proper form completion may result in infinite procedural loops." In a secure facility on Earth, the complete documentation for Operation Papercut remains sealed in triplicate. The classification notice reads, "Access requires forms CLS-1 through CLS-99